There is a quiet fear that lives beneath even the strongest exterior, a tremble hidden under practiced smiles, careful answers, and the soft choreography of daily life. It is the fear of being seen, not in passing, not in fragments, but in full. The kind of seeing that feels like standing in the center of a silent room with nowhere to hide. Most people never admit this fear out loud, but they feel it in the tightening of their throat when someone looks too closely, in the urge to retreat when affection becomes real, in the way they offer stories polished at the edges, hoping no one notices the parts they left out. This fear does not announce itself. It simply lives within the human heart, shaping the ways people love, speak, and hold themselves together. Not in grand moments or dramatic emotional upheaval, but in the subtle ways a person learns to shrink just enough to stay unnoticed. The fear of being truly seen rarely announces itself with clarity. Instead, it slips into the pauses between conversations, the slight stiffness when someone asks a personal question, or the instinct to soften the truth so it lands gently and reveals nothing raw. There is a moment, small, almost forgettable, when a child realizes that some parts of them are met with silence, confusion, or disapproval. And this moment plants the earliest seed. But before any of that, before memory sharpens into cause and effect, the fear appears as a sensation, a tightening, a sense of being exposed without knowing why. In adulthood, this fear lives in the quiet exchanges that populate daily life. Someone looks into your eyes a little too long, and something in you pulls back. Someone asks if you're okay, in a tone that suggests they already know the answer, and you offer the safest version of the truth. Someone notices a detail you didn't expect them to see, the exhaustion behind the smile, the hesitation in your voice, and your mind instinctively reaches for cover. People call it shyness, or privacy, or simply being reserved. But beneath those labels is often something more fragile, the sense that if someone looks too closely, something might break. Not physically, not visibly, but internally, in the places you keep arranged with such careful order. This fear doesn't always feel like fear at first. It can feel like vigilance, like caution, like being smart about who gets access to you. Yet beneath the logic lies something softer, quieter, and far more human. A deep uncertainty about whether your truest self will be accepted or understood. And so people become experts at managing how they are perceived. They learn to speak in tones that avoid misunderstanding. They shape their stories so they appear consistent, likable, or easy. They keep certain emotions folded neatly inside themselves, choosing silence over the risk of misinterpretation. They become curators of their own personality, showing only what feels safe. Sometimes the hiding is so seamless that even they don't notice they're doing it. There is an art to concealment that many perfect without meaning to. A gentle redirection of attention, a practiced laugh, a subtle change of subject at just the right moment. A controlled distance that feels natural to everyone else, but is carefully measured from within. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the day is over, when the mask softens, when no one is watching, there is a question that rises inside. What would happen if someone truly saw me? Not the polished version, not the edited self, but the unguarded being that exists under the practiced composure. For some, this question brings warmth, a longing, a small hope. For others, it brings tension, the instinct to step back, to hide, to protect. And still, the fear remains universal in its shape. Even the most confident people carry a version of it. Even those who seem transparent often reveal only what they're comfortable revealing. Even those who crave closeness sometimes feel overwhelmed by the possibility of being emotionally uncovered. The first flicker of this fear often goes unnoticed, but it sets the tone for so much of life. It shapes how people form connections, how they navigate relationships, how they choose when to open up and when to retreat. It lingers in moments of affection, trust, confrontation, and vulnerability. This chapter is where the story begins, with the small, almost invisible ways the fear first appears, with the soft choreography of protection that becomes instinct over time, with the early hints that being fully seen is both something humans crave and something they quietly fear. A fear that most people will never name, but will feel every time someone looks at them with the intent to truly understand. Before fear becomes a behavior, before it becomes a habit or a shield, it begins as a lesson, often unspoken, often unintentional, but deeply felt. Childhood is the place where those first lessons are written, not in clear sentences, but in tones, reactions, and the emotional climate that surrounds a child like weather. Children do not understand the complexities of acceptance or rejection. They understand only sensation, warmth or coldness, expansion or contraction, welcome or dismissal. And within these sensations, they learn what parts of themselves are safe to bring forward. Sometimes the lesson forms gently. A child expresses joy too loudly, and an adult shushes them without meaning to. A question is asked at an inconvenient moment, and irritation flickers across a parent's face. A small mistake is met with disproportionate disappointment. These moments may seem trivial from the outside, but a child's world is small and sensitive. To them, every reaction feels like a mirror reflecting their worth. Other times, the lesson forms in more delicate ways. A parent who is emotionally distant teaches the child that their inner world is something to handle alone. Family dynamic full of tension makes the child cautious, careful not to contribute anything that might add to the strain. A household where vulnerability is mocked or misunderstood teaches the child to hide softness as if it were something breakable. And so, without intending to, the child learns that their authentic self, their unfiltered emotions, thoughts, and impulses may carry risks. Risks of being misunderstood, risks of being judged, risks of being too much or not enough, or simply inconvenient. These early lessons do not arrive as explicit instructions. No one tells a child, "Hide who you are to stay safe." Yet the message settles quietly inside them all the same. For some, the fear grows in an environment of perfectionism. A child praised for their achievements, but ignored in their vulnerability, may learn that only their successful self is acceptable. They start filtering themselves, presenting only the parts that earn approval. They hide the parts that waver, the parts that fail, the parts that feel. For others, the fear grows in the presence of unpredictability. A parent whose mood shifts without warning can make a child hyper-attuned to the emotional cues around them. The child learns to scan the room before speaking, to gauge safety before expressing anything real. Authenticity begins to feel like a luxury they cannot afford. Some children learn the fear in more subtle ways still, through social comparisons, cultural expectations, or the quiet pressure to conform. They discover that being different draws attention, and attention to a child who doesn't understand its intentions can feel like exposure. These early shadows don't vanish as the child grows. They become internalized, woven into the person's emotional framework. What was once a survival response becomes a personality trait. What was once a defense becomes a story the child unknowingly continues to tell themselves. It's safer to hide. It's safer not to be seen in full. Many adults look back and blame themselves for their reluctance to open up. They call it insecurity or weakness, but often the roots lie in experiences they were too young to interpret. Experiences that told them, in quiet ways, that being fully visible came with emotional consequences. The origins of this fear are rarely dramatic. They are subtle, cumulative, and deeply human. They come from longing to be understood without causing disruption, longing to be accepted without condition, longing to exist without the need for adjustment. These childhood shadows, however unintentional, create the blueprint that follows a person into adulthood. They become the reason someone hesitates before speaking their truth, the reason they shrink in moments of intimacy, the reason they offer only fragments of themselves, not because they lack courage, but because a younger version of themselves learned that exposure, even in small doses, could sting. And even as years pass, that child within still whispers the same quiet warning: be careful. Someone might see too much. To be seen is not merely emotional, it is biological. The body reacts to exposure long before the mind has words for it. And understanding this fear requires looking at what happens beneath the surface, in the nervous system, in attachment patterns, in the invisible architecture of the human brain. The fear of being seen begins with the oldest part of the self, the instinct to survive. When someone perceives emotional exposure, the brain often interprets it as vulnerability. Not metaphorically, literally. The amygdala, responsible for detecting threat, cannot distinguish between a physical danger and an emotional one. When another person looks too closely, asks too deeply, or notices something you didn't intend to reveal, the nervous system may react as if something precious needs protection. A slight acceleration of the heartbeat, a shallow breath, a subtle urge to withdraw or deflect. These are not character flaws. They are physiological responses, yet the mind often tries to rationalize them. It's nothing. I'm just private. I don't want to bother anyone. But underneath these words lies a primitive wiring. Proximity invites risk. Attachment theory explains another layer. Humans learn early whether others are emotionally safe. When a child experiences consistent warmth and responsiveness, they grow to associate closeness with stability. But when care is unpredictable, dismissive, or overwhelming, the brain learns that emotional openness might lead to pain. These early patterns shape adult relationships silently, influencing how someone responds when another person tries to cross into their inner world. Some people develop attachment styles that prioritize protection over connection. They pull back not because they do not want closeness, but because closeness feels uncertain. Transparency feels like stepping onto fragile ground. Being fully seen feels like giving someone else the power to confirm or deny their worth. It is not rejection they fear most. It is misinterpretation, misunderstanding, exposure without understanding. Another psychological factor emerges from self-concept, the brain's internal model of who you are. This model forms over years, shaped by memories, feedback, cultural messages, and internalized beliefs. When someone sees you differently from how you see yourself, better, worse, or simply deeper, it disrupts this internal model. The mind resists such disruptions. It wants consistency, familiarity, predictability. To be truly seen, threatens this internal stability. It introduces uncertainty. It requires the possibility of updating the self you've always believed yourself to be. There is also the fear of evaluation, a phenomenon deeply rooted in social psychology. Humans evolved in groups where acceptance meant survival. Being judged, excluded, or misunderstood carried real consequences. Even now, in modern life, the remnants of this instinct remain. When a person reveals their inner world, they open themselves to evaluation, to the possibility that someone might see them as flawed, strange, or different. Yet perhaps the most profound psychological mechanism is this. People often fear being seen because they have spent years hiding parts of themselves from their own awareness. Hidden insecurities, unprocessed emotions, unresolved memories, these become internal rooms kept locked. When someone else approaches these rooms, even gently, the body tightens. Not because the other person is unsafe, but because opening these internal doors means facing long-buried truths. Being seen doesn't only mean being perceived by another. It means confronting oneself in ways that feel unfamiliar. This fear is not a sign of emotional inadequacy. It is a reflection of how deeply humans care about belonging, how much they long for acceptance, how intensely they wish to be understood. And yet, the mind protects, it shields, it guards. Not because it wants distance, but because it remembers, on psychological and biological levels, the moments when openness once hurt. Understanding these mechanisms doesn't remove the fear, but it reveals its humanity. It shows that the fear of being seen is not irrational or unusual. It is woven into the human design, carried by everyone in different forms. A shared vulnerability, a shared instinct, a shared longing wrapped in quiet caution. There is a quiet structure inside every person, a place built from instinct, memory, and self-protection. It does not appear all at once. It grows slowly, shaped by the small and large experiences that teach a person which parts of themselves feel safe to show, and which parts feel safer kept hidden. Over time, this structure becomes a kind of inner fortress, not a fortress made of stone or stubbornness, but of subtle defenses, silence, withdrawal, humor used as a shield, perfectionism, selective honesty. These are not choices made consciously. They are the natural architecture of someone who has learned that authenticity carries weight. Inside this fortress, two forces coexist. One longs to be known, the other insists on protection. The longing is ancient. It comes from the human need to be understood, the desire to have one's inner world recognized without judgment. This longing whispers in moments of connection. It appears in the softness that rises when someone listens with genuine care. It shows itself when affection feels close enough to touch. It is the quiet ache that says, maybe someone could hold who I am. But the resistance is equally powerful. It enters the moment vulnerability feels too visible. It tightens the body when someone notices a shift in mood. It makes honesty feel risky, even with people who have done nothing wrong. This inner conflict is not dramatic. It is gentle, constant, and deeply human. Part of you opens the door. Another part carefully closes it again. The fortress does not form out of distrust toward others. It forms out of caution toward life. People build it to protect the most tender parts of themselves, the parts shaped by earlier disappointments, misunderstandings, or emotional wounds that healed without ever truly closing. These experiences sit quietly inside, influencing how someone responds to closeness even when the memories are faded. The contradiction becomes a quiet, daily rhythm. You want to be understood, but you speak carefully. You want to be supported, but you hold your struggles in. You want love to reach you, but you stay half turned away. And in that contradiction, a kind of loneliness forms, not from the lack of people, but from the lack of visibility. It is possible to be surrounded, yet unseen, to be cared for, yet unknown. People often mistake this inner fortress for indifference. They assume the person is detached, distant, uninterested. But indifference is rarely the truth. More often, it is hesitation, a cautious balancing of longing and fear. Inside the fortress, every opening feels like a negotiation. If I show this part of myself, will it be held gently? If I say what I'm feeling, will the ground beneath me stay steady? If someone sees the unpolished pieces, will they turn away? These questions linger even in moments of connection. And so the person shares themselves in fragments, enough to be present, but not enough to feel exposed. Enough to maintain closeness, but not enough to risk being fully understood. Yet the fortress is not a failure. It is an adaptation, a testament to how deeply humans care about emotional safety. Still, there are moments when the walls feel burdensome, when someone's kindness presses gently against them, when trust begins to grow, however quietly. In those moments, the fortress becomes something more complex, a place that protects, but also restricts, a structure built for survival that quietly longs to soften. The conflict between openness and protection is not a flaw. It is a form of emotional intelligence, the recognition that authenticity can both heal and hurt. The fortress exists because the heart knows its own fragility. But within the walls, there is also a small, persistent truth. The desire to be seen never disappears. It waits. It watches. It hopes for someone who will not force the doors open, but simply stand at the entrance with patience. And in that stillness, the person might begin, slowly, to let light in. There comes a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes unmistakable, when the mask someone has worn for years begins to shift. Not because they decide to remove it, and not because they suddenly feel ready to be seen, but because something inside them becomes too heavy to hold in place. The mask has been a companion for so long, a quiet tool for survival, a way to navigate conversations, expectations, and relationships without revealing the softness that lives underneath. It was never meant to deceive. It was meant to simplify, to smooth over, to protect. But even the most practiced mask has limits. The cracking doesn't happen in a dramatic break. It happens in tiny, tender moments. A voice trembles unexpectedly. A carefully chosen smile doesn't quite reach the eyes. An honest sentence slips out before it can be filtered. These small slips carry a quiet truth. The inner world has grown too full to remain hidden. People often imagine emotional turning points as sudden transformations. But real change arrives differently, softly, gradually, carried in the weight of accumulated silence. It begins when someone notices the cost of staying unseen. Maybe it appears in their relationships. Conversations start feeling shallow, not because others lack depth, but because the person themselves keeps offering only the polished version. They listen, they support, they show up. But something inside remains untouched, and this distance, once protective, begins to feel isolating. Or perhaps the turning point happens internally, when the gap between their outer self and inner truth becomes too wide to ignore. They start feeling like a visitor in their own life, present in action, absent in emotion. The performances that once felt effortless now feel exhausting. There is a grief in realizing how much of oneself has been hidden. A quiet mourning for the moments when openness was possible but never attempted. A recognition that the fear of being seen has also led to the fear of being known. Sometimes the mask cracks in the presence of someone who sees more than expected. A friend who notices the tremor behind a casual "I'm fine." A partner who senses the unspoken tension beneath the surface. A stranger who asks a question that lands too close to the truth. These interactions create unfamiliar openings, small windows where the inner world becomes visible. And in those windows, something warm appears. Relief. Not relief that someone has seen the pain, but relief that the truth has surfaced at all. Relief that for a moment there is no performance, no correction, no adjustment. Relief that someone glimpsed the real self, even if only briefly. This relief is often followed by fear. The instinct to retreat quickly returns. The person might apologize for showing emotion, or minimize what they revealed, or build the walls higher the next day. The fortress reflex is strong, but the crack remains, and once the mask has shifted, it cannot return to its original shape. The turning point is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming aware. Awareness begins with questions. Why does it feel so difficult to be seen? Why does hiding no longer feel like safety? Why does honesty feel both terrifying and necessary? These questions mark the beginning of emotional reckoning. They signal that the person is starting to notice the tension between longing and protection, between connection and avoidance, between who they show and who they are. This turning point is tender. There is no urgency, no demand for change, just a soft shift, an understanding that hiding has its cost. People begin to recognize that the mask, while once necessary, now keeps them from the closeness they quietly crave. They begin to see that no relationship can touch the deeper parts of them if those parts remain wrapped in silence. And slowly, gently, they realize that being seen is not simply a risk. It is also a possibility for understanding, for connection, for being held in authenticity rather than performance. The cracking of the mask is not the end of fear. It is the beginning of truth. A truth that asks to be acknowledged, not rushed. A truth that invites the person to exist not in fragments, but as a whole. Openness does not arrive in a single moment. It comes in waves, tentative, uneven, sometimes retreating before it returns again. After years of living behind quiet defenses, the act of staying open feels unfamiliar, like stepping into sunlight after a long time indoors. The brightness is comforting, yet overwhelming. Beautiful, yet fragile. This stage is not about transformation, it is about adjustment. It is about learning what it feels like to let small truths surface without rushing to cover them. Learning to remain present when someone looks at you with sincerity. Learning to breathe even when the body instinctively tenses. Staying open begins with very gentle moments, a conversation where you speak honestly and the world does not collapse. A moment of emotion that rises unexpectedly and is met with patience rather than judgment. A confession you feared would push someone away, but instead draws them a little closer. These moments do not erase fear. They sit alongside it. Both exist at the same time. The vulnerability of being seen and the relief of being understood. For many, the first experience of safe openness feels almost unreal. There is a part of the mind that waits for the familiar consequences, for disappointment, for withdrawal, for misunderstanding. when those consequences do not arrive, confusion follows. Hope and fear begin to coexist in the same breath. The heart tries to rewrite old patterns, but the body remembers the past too vividly to let its defenses drop all at once. So openness becomes a practice rather than a decision. Sometimes it is steady. Sometimes it slips. Sometimes it feels like progress. Other times it feels like weakness. But underneath all of this, something quiet is shifting. The idea that being known does not have to be dangerous. People often imagine healing as certainty, but in truth, it is more like tolerance. Learning to tolerate being seen without shutting down. Learning to tolerate uncertainty without assuming the worst. Learning to tolerate closeness without expecting to disappear within it. This emotional tolerance grows slowly through repetition. Each time someone shows acceptance instead of judgment, the nervous system softens. Each time honesty is met with warmth, the fortress loosens its grip. Each time someone stays rather than turning away, the brain learns a new pattern, one that contradicts the old lessons. But even in these moments, the impulse to retreat remains. It appears when things feel too close, too intimate, too sincere. It appears when someone notices the emotion in your voice. It appears when affection feels more like exposure than comfort. Staying open does not mean ignoring this impulse. It means acknowledging it without letting it take over. The person learns to sit with discomfort instead of fleeing from it. They begin to understand that vulnerability will always come with its own tension. That the presence of fear does not mean danger is present. That the instinct to hide is simply an old reflex resurfacing. One of the gentlest steps in openness is allowing others to be imperfect too. To realize that no one sees with perfect understanding. No one hears with perfect sensitivity. No one receives your truth flawlessly. Sometimes someone will misread you. Sometimes they will respond awkwardly. Sometimes they will not fully grasp what you meant. But this no longer feels catastrophic. It becomes a reminder that openness is not about being understood perfectly. It is about allowing yourself to exist without constant self-editing. As trust grows, the person begins to inhabit themselves more fully. They stop pre-planning every sentence. They let emotions show in their eyes without apology. They share small pieces of their inner world without bracing for impact. And slowly, the fear of being seen transforms, not into fearlessness, but into something more grounded. A kind of quiet courage, a willingness to step into authenticity, even while the heart trembles. Openness becomes less about exposure and more about presence, less about risk and more about connection, less about revealing everything and more about allowing something real to exist in the space between two people. In this stage, the self begins to emerge, not because the walls fall completely, but because they soften enough for light to pass through. In the end, to be seen is not a grand gesture. It is a quiet reveal, something that unfolds slowly, gently, like the soft opening of a hand that has been clenched for too long. There is no sudden transformation, no triumphant moment where all fear dissolves. Instead, there is a gradual settling, a soft recognition that the self you once hid is still here, still worthy, still capable of being held with care. The reveal begins in subtle ways, in the comfort of showing small imperfections without scrambling to correct them, in the ease of speaking without rehearsing, in the softening that occurs when someone looks at you, not with scrutiny, but with quiet presence. In these moments, the fear of being seen does not vanish. but it becomes quieter, less commanding. It shifts from a warning into a whisper. The nervous system still remembers its old reflexes, but it no longer demands them. The body learns that exposure can coexist with safety. The reveal is not about revealing everything. It is about revealing enough. Enough to be known in ways that feel honest. Enough to exist without constant self-protection. Enough to let your presence fill the space you occupy. There is a gentle empowerment in this. Not the loud empowerment of confidence or certainty, but the soft empowerment of acceptance. The realization that you can let yourself be seen even while you remain imperfect, uncertain, and in progress. In this stage, people often notice how resilience grows not from concealment, but from authenticity. It grows from acknowledging your emotions instead of silencing them, from expressing what matters rather than dismissing it, from allowing someone else to witness your inner life without filtering it into something smaller or smoother. The quiet reveal also brings a deeper kind of clarity. When you allow yourself to be seen, you see others more clearly too. You recognize their fears, their hesitations, their attempts to mask their vulnerability. You sense the familiar tremble in their voice when they speak a truth. And this recognition softens your response toward them and toward yourself. The reveal creates room for gentleness. Gentleness towards the child you once were, who learned to hide to stay safe. Gentleness toward the adult you became, who carried those lessons longer than needed. Gentleness toward the future self, who will still feel fear at times and still open anyway. This final stage is not the absence of fear. It is the integration of it. The understanding that fear and openness can live within the same breath, the same moment, the same relationship. The reveal teaches that vulnerability does not require perfection, only presence. As the walls soften, the inner world becomes more expansive. You begin to realize that being seen is not just about others witnessing you. It is about you witnessing yourself, without judgment, without harshness, without the instinct to retreat. There is a different kind of visibility that emerges, one that comes from within. You start recognizing your own needs with clarity instead of shame. You start speaking with sincerity instead of performance. You start honoring your emotions instead of minimizing them. And others feel this, not because you declare it, but because your presence changes, quieter perhaps, but more real, more grounded, more aligned with the truth that has lived inside you for so long. The quiet reveal is not a destination. It is a rhythm, opening, softening, retreating slightly, opening again. A lifelong practice of allowing yourself to be known in ways that honor your boundaries and your humanity. Fear may never fully disappear, but it no longer dictates the shape of your life. It becomes one voice among many, no longer the loudest, no longer the one you follow without question. And in this mellow balance, a deeper truth emerges. Being seen is not something you must earn or perform for. It is something you can allow, something you can experience without bending yourself into pieces, something that grows naturally when you make room for your own sincerity. In the quiet reveal, you become visible not through transparency, but through presence, not through confession, but through authenticity, not through perfection, but through the gentle courage of allowing your truth to exist. And as this truth settles, the fear softens. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you learned that being seen, truly seen, is not a danger to escape, but a tenderness to grow into.